Okay, good evening everybody. It's Bart from multirotorforums.com, and I'm just I'm doing this build, this multi-impossible build, and I'm just so blown away by how much bigger these version 3 BLs are. That's BL is Mikrokopter's word for speed controller, or an ESC, and the BL comes from the B and the L in the word brushless. So this is the version 3 BL. This is a version 2 BL, so it's much bigger. You could see the pads where you would mount the motor wires are completely different, and the version 3 actually has motor pads on either side, so you can orient it either way and still be able to access motor mounting pads. With the old version 2 BLs, you had the pads on one side and that was it, so it was always this way up if you wanted to be able to mount your motor wires. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to show how the capacitors, also the capacitors are much larger. Look at the difference in size. So I'm just going to show real quick how you mount the capacitors to the board. When you get the board, it looks like this. The capacitors aren't attached, and so what you do is you solder them into place. The legs are left sticking out like that, and you just snip them off, so the finished BL with the capacitors attached looks like this. Now in the past, these capacitors have vibrated, and the fine wire legs that hold the capacitor in place, that put the electricity in and out of the capacitor, those legs would snap. So before I actually fly this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a blob of hot glue between the board and the capacitor just to keep it from vibrating, so that it doesn't have as much of a chance of snapping. So that's just a past history of Mikrokopter, where those of us that were flying it, some guys were crashing because we didn't realize that these capacitors were vibrating. And this was especially true when the Mikrokopter XL, the heavy lift kits, started coming out, which aren't really so heavy lift now compared to what we're flying today. But the heavy lift kits, the vibration was completely different, and it would cause the capacitors to vibrate and snap off. So a little hot glue will usually keep them from vibrating. So to get started, what I use to do this, I use an old pair of needle nose pliers that have real thin plier jaws. And what I do is I just push it up against the capacitor like that. I try to line it up so it's parallel with the face of the capacitor, so I get a nice straight bend like that. And then I just push it over. Just make a 90-degree bend. This stripe is the negative prong. There's a polarity to the two prongs. This bright stripe on the side is the negative. The other side doesn't have it. That's the positive. So you want to do one with the stripe on the right side and one with the stripe on the left side. Alright, so you just do that. Then you take your board. Now, because these can go either way, I'm going to be mounting 4 of them one way and 4 the other way, but I want my capacitors to all go in from the top. So I've already made 4 with the large motor pads on top, so now I'm going to make 4 with the smaller motor connect pads on top. And the outer prongs, the outer holes, there's 2 sets of holes for the capacitors to mount. The outer holes are the negatives. So on one, negative goes on the outside. The other one, you put it in, negative goes on the outside. So you see that the stripe is on the outside on both of those. So what I'm doing, which seems to work, is I'm just putting this on the edge of a piece of wood so the prongs can hang off the side. And then I'm pulling it into the wood. You can see the capacitors moving, right? I'm just pulling it into the wood until they stick out nice and straight. Oops, I bumped the tripod again. And then I'm just using a pair of pliers for weight to hold it there. Alright, so I've got my standard soldering tip, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go from one side to the other. I'm going to put the soldering iron at the base of the leg where it goes into the board. I'm going to push the tip of the iron there, give it a few seconds to get hot, and I like to just put a tiny little dot of solder to just aid with heat transfer from the soldering iron into the board. I won't do the whole thing that way, but just the first little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up a little solder around where the leg goes into the hole of the board. Then I'm going to move on to the next one. This will just take a second. I let the iron sit for an extra second just so the flux can boil out. Move on to the next one. Give it 3 or 4 seconds. Go on to the next one. And this is just one of these mysteries with Mikrokopter. People think that because you have to solder these components together that it's it's a barrier to entry for a lot of people. But once you learn these little skills, these basic skills, it's really not that hard. And Mikrokopter flies great. Once it's all put together, it's reliable. The flying qualities are excellent. The GPS holds in the wind. I set mine up where I have... Anyway, I'm talking. I just flipped it over. I'm just putting another drop of solder. I have 2 here that I haven't done yet. I started chit-chatting. So I put the soldering iron right at the base. And you want to look... When you look at the bottom, you want to see that you could see some solder in the hole as if it had tried to work its way through. So what I do is I just put the iron there from the opposite side, and I just put a little more solder. These capacitors are really important for the BLs because they help to smooth out the electricity going into the BL. So if there's a big command for the motors to really spin up fast, these act like little batteries on board, and they give extra energy to the motors and to the BLs to be able to function. So once you get that solder on and it's cooled off, you just take your snips, you cut the excess, you cut the excess right at the base as close as you can, and that's it. And then what I do is I take my little plastic Dixie cup, I put some denatured alcohol in there, or isopropyl alcohol, take my toothbrush, and I just go like this on both sides to wash away any flux from the solder that might be left behind. And then I either use compressed air or I just let it sit and dry. Okay? Alcohol conducts electricity, so never apply power immediately after you've washed stuff, because if there's alcohol underneath any of these surface mounted all these little components, they're called SMDs, surface mounted devices. That means they're soldered to the surface of the board. If alcohol gets underneath there, it'll short the component, can cause a fire, can blow out the board. So if you're going to wash with alcohol, make sure you give everything plenty of time to dry before you go ahead and apply electricity. Alright, but that's a BL3, it's technically 3.0, but they're calling them 3.x because they're already up to version 2 software. So right now, today, this would be a BL version 3.2 from Mikrokopter. And we're going to keep working on the multi-impossible build. Hopefully get that Movi, I said it right, Movi, M5 gimbal flying by the weekend. And that's one step. Thanks for watching.